If you're looking for a woodworking project that doesn't cost thousands of dollars to build or months of time to complete, then today's video is for you. Today I've got 4 quick and simple projects that you can build in less than a day. Not only are these projects fun and easy to build in just a few hours with just some scraps that you have lying around, but they're also going to help reinforce some of those essential woodworking skills that you'll need for those more advanced, larger projects. So without wasting any more time, let's get started. For this first project, go raid your lumber rack or your scrap bin and find yourself a board that's about 2 feet long. Doesn't matter what material. If all you have is some pine, I want you to take a deep breath and repeat after me. Ready? Pine is fine. All right, got your material? Now let's get started. Now all of our parts get cut down to size here at the table saw. And if you'd like a set of plans that you can take out into the shop to build along, I have those available at biscuittreewoodworks.com. When you're done, you should have an 8-inch base, 4 side pieces, and 2 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch squares. And now we're going to tilt the table saw blade so that we can cut some miters in these side pieces. Now a really neat trick here is to actually go beyond 45 degrees by just 1/10 of a degree. This will ensure that you get a really tight miter on the outside. And once the saw blade is set, cut the miters on both sides of all of your side pieces. And while our saw blade is still set up at that angle, we're going to use our miter gauge to cut a miter on one side of each of our square blocks. Okay, now we're going to take these side pieces that we just put the miters on, and we're going to make this little bottomless box. Now, a mitered box like this is almost impossible to clamp together. So what we're going to do is use a straight edge and some good old blue tape. All right, so I got my straight edge clamped down here so it doesn't move. I'll take my pieces and push them down here and then just stretch some blue tape across these joints to hold them together. And once all those are taped, just flip it over. Now we can apply glue in our joints and close this up. Now we just fold it together and put some tape on this outside. There we go. Go ahead and wipe off any glue squeeze out that you have. If you have a little bit of squeeze out, that's a good thing. It shows you got enough glue in the joint. Better a little too much than not enough. And if you have any glue squeeze out on the inside, which you probably do, plastic straw, and just run that down the inside corner and get all that glue squeeze out. All right, once that glue is dried, you can remove the tape, clean up any other squeeze out that you may have, and now we can glue the box onto our base. All right, and once that glue's set up a bit, we just need to add these 2 pieces to this other side, just like that. All right, once the glue's dry and you've sanded everything down, removed all the sharp edges and corners and all, you can go ahead and apply your finish. Now, again, finish doesn't really matter. Use whatever you have available. You can use polyurethane, you can use spray lacquer, I'm using a Danish oil. It really doesn't matter on this type of project. It's fairly light use project. I do recommend if you're going to use a hardwood, do something with a little bit of oil to it, like a Danish oil, linseed oil, anything like that. It's going to give the wood a little bit more pop and a little bit more interest to it. Now, this is a really fun and simple little project that you can build and give to someone as a gift that they're actually going to use and appreciate. And the best thing is you could build this or probably several of these in a single afternoon. All right, now for this next project, we're going to grab ourselves a board that's, about 3 feet long. This is cherry. Again, doesn't matter what you have, use whatever you've got on hand. And again, pine is fine. Now we're going to take our board, we're going to cut it down at the table saw into 3 equal lengths. All right, now I can cut these down to the width that I need. 2 of these are going to be 4 inches wide, and 1 I'm going to cut down to 3 inches. So now we're going to take our 4-inch wide board and our 3-inch wide board, and we're going to glue these together to make a 7-inch wide panel. Now, I know you may be asking, why am I gluing these boards together to make a panel? Why didn't I start with a board that was already 7 inches wide? The wider a board is, the more likely it is to tend to cup, and then just going to give you a warped panel. Now, this is especially true with some pine that you may have picked up from Lowe's or Home Depot, somewhere like that. That board is going to start to cup in the middle, and it's not going to give you a good flat panel. By using narrower boards and gluing them together, you can avoid a lot of that cupping. And while that glue's drying, I'm going to set up a 3/4 inch dado over here at the table saw. Once the glue's dry, remove the panel from the clamps and clean up any glue squeeze out. And now we're going to set the table saw fence so that the dado stack is going to cut right through and right along the glue joint in our panel. This is going to help hide that glue joint so we don't see it in our finished product. All right, so now we need to lay out some measurements to show us where to drill some holes for some hardware. All right, now I'm just going to drill a little pilot hole for each of these marks. It can help to use a little piece of blue tape as a little flag and kind of like a little depth indicator to keep you from going too far. Then don't forget to take that off to do these 2 on the other side all the way through. Now I'm going to flip this board over upside down and use my countersink bit to countersink these 2 through holes. All right, so now we can put this aside for a minute, and we take our shelf piece and we're going to mark 2 holes for countersunk holes for this one for the hardware. All right, now before we assemble this thing, let's sand it down good, remove all the mill marks, the pencil marks, take off all the sharp corners and edges, and get it all ready for finish. All right, now we can add some glue to this dado and glue our shelf in place. Make sure when you put this shelf in, it's in the right orientation with the countersunk holes on the bottom facing these holes. Just like that. A couple of these corner clamps just to make sure our shelf stays nice and square. All right, our glue is dry, and right now is the perfect time to add the finish before we put on all the hardware and it's all in the way and we're having to try to work around it. So once again, doesn't really matter what you put on. This is a light duty project. I'm just going back with some Danish oil. All right, as soon as your finish of choice has had a chance to dry, now we can put on the hardware and hang our shelf. Now, this little shelf is a really simple project that you could knock out easily in an afternoon. It takes basically no materials, basically just some scraps and this hardware you can pick up in bulk, and you could turn out a bunch of these and make a really nice profit. So be sure to check the link down in the description for the plans and links to all the hardware. All right, so for our next project, I'm going to be using this rough and kind of rustic piece of oak. Now, again, the type of material that you use really doesn't matter for these projects. So again, use whatever you have, and yes, pine is fine. Now, the first thing we need to do is get this board cut down to size for each of our individual parts. If you're following along, all the dimensions are in the plans. We've got a little bit of a problem, but I have a really neat trick to show you on how to deal with this. So for this project, I want some nice, thick, 1.5 inch square legs. Unfortunately, I don't have any 1.5 inch thick oak that I can use. So all I have is this 3/4 inch oak. So what you can do is take some glue between these boards, and we're going to sandwich them together and clamp them with the faces together just like this. And that is going to create a board that is 1.5 inch thick. And from this blank, we can then cut out some nice square 1.5 inch thick legs. So this is just a really neat trick for whenever you want something a little bit beefier for nice thick legs, but you don't have the stock for it. Now I can just put this aside and let the glue dry for a while. In the meantime, I'm going to keep cutting down my parts, and then we'll get started on some really simple joinery. Now we're also going to take 2 of our boards and glue them together side by side like this to give us one wide panel for our top. So while the glue dries on our leg blanks and our top, we can take our aprons and cut them down to length and then start working on some joinery. Now, to keep your projects from looking all square and blocky, I always recommend trying to add some type of curves or angles to your projects. So I'm going to take these aprons and I'm going to implement some gentle curves into them before we do the assembly. Now, to trace these curves on your projects, you could use something like these fancy drawing bows. You can also use something simple like a couple of clamps and a long flexible piece of wood. Or even just some cans or buckets that you have laying around the shop. Now, my preferred method for cutting curves is at the bandsaw, but don't forget, if you don't have a bandsaw, you can still cut these curves with a jigsaw. Now, the bandsaw is going to leave things a bit rough, so I do recommend using a bit of sandpaper and smoothing out the cut. Of course, if you're a hand tool person, this is a great time to break out the spoke shave. So when it comes to the joiner for this project, you have several options and none of them are incorrect. You could go with dowels or biscuits or dominoes or even the classic mortise and tenon. All of those are really acceptable choices for something like this. I'm going to go with the classic Craig pocket holes because those are the fastest, easiest, and probably most accessible to most beginners. But again, it's dealer's choice here, so use whatever you're comfortable with. Now that our 1.5 inch thick oak sandwich has completely dried, the glue's cured on it, we can start cutting this down and get out our legs. So earlier I told you how adding a curve to the aprons is going to make them look a lot more interesting and make the piece look lighter and a bit more professional looking. So we can do something similar with the legs. Instead of having these just big blocky square legs, we can add a bit of a taper to the inside edges, and that's going to lighten the piece and make it look a lot more interesting. I'm going to start by marking a line about 2.5 inches up from the bottom of the inside faces on one of my legs. Now here I have about the simplest version of a tapering jig as you could make. This is just a simple wedge that I've cut out and I've drilled a hole in one edge. And that's where I can put in a simple dowel to act as a stop for using at either the table saw or my bandsaw. Now the straight side of this jig is going to ride smoothly along the table saw fence. And this dowel is going to keep the block of my leg from coming backwards so I can push it through the blade. Now I'll just ease my fence over until I'm starting to make a cut, and I'll make my first cut. And I'm going to start sneaking up on it until the blade is cutting about where my mark is for 2.5 inches up from the bottom. Now that I have the taper that I want on one side, just rotate the part 90 degrees and I can cut the taper on the other side. Now with the table saw fence set, I can cut the taper on the inside faces of all four of my legs. Now remember, we're only doing this on the 2 inside faces of the bottom of each leg. Don't do all 4 faces all the way around. So the last thing we're going to do before we start the assembly is make sure everything gets sanded down good, smoothed out, and we're going to add a few roundovers. Just want to add a gentle round over to like the bottom edge of our aprons, just the curved bottom edge. You want to leave the ends and the top square. Now with our legs, you can add roundovers to all the long sides and the bottom of the foot, but leave the top square. Now, as far as doing the roundovers, you can do that just with sanding to round the edges over, or you can use a roundover bit with your router table or a trim router. Okay, let's assemble our legs and aprons now, but I don't want the aprons to sit flush with the outside edge of the legs. That's just kind of boring. Instead, I want the apron to sit slightly recessed away from the edge. This creates a little bit of a shadow line, kind of like a reveal that is going to just look a whole lot more interesting. And the great thing is with pocket holes, this is really, really simple to do. And all I need is just a little scrap of 1/4 inch plywood. So instead of putting the parts flat on the table like this and driving in the screws, which is going to make the parts flush on the face, instead I take my little 1/4 inch piece of plywood, set it underneath the apron, then I can clamp everything down and drive in my screws. And when I do, this creates this nice little setback that creates this really neat looking shadow line. It's going to make your project look so much better. Now, when you're assembling these, make sure that you actually have a left and a right because, yeah, you don't want to end up with 2 of one side because I've definitely done that before. And the long aprons go on the exact same way to finish up the frame. There we go. With our base ready to go, now it's time to work on the top. We're going to get it out of the clamps and clean up all this glue squeeze out and then cut it down to size. Okay, with the top cut down to the size, I've got everything flipped over upside down so I can work underneath the top. Now I've gone around and made sure that the base is centered on the top, making sure that I've got even spacing from the edge on all sides, all the way around. So we're perfectly centered here. Now I'm going to take my rule and I'm going to measure in 1 inch from the inside apron. Now I've got a set of dividers. I'm going to set it on that mark and then in the center of the top. And these are set for 4 inches wide. And I just want to make sure that I can spin the dividers all the way around without touching any sides. And if I can do that, I found the perfect center. I'm just going to make a mark right there where I can find that again. And then just make sure to do that for both sides. Then we can remove the base, and I'm going to use the dividers in that center point that we found to scratch a circle 8 inches in diameter all the way around the inside of this board. So I'm going to cut a relief hole on the inside of the circle with a Forstner bit. That's going to allow me to get in there with the jigsaw. Now with the jigsaw, I'm going to follow the circle and try to stay on the line as much as possible. If it's not perfect, not a big deal. Just try to stay as close to that line as you can. Okay, so the holes are cut out. So now I just need to take this and sand it down and round over the edges. Okay, before I put on the top, I'm going to go ahead and apply the finish. Now I'm going to use Osmo. This is a hard wax oil. If you haven't used these hard wax oils, they're just super easy to apply. Just wipe it on, and after a few minutes, you wipe it all off. Really easy. Usually you can just get by with a single coat. You don't even have to do multiple coats in most cases. And it's usually ready to go within 24 hours. Just let it sit for a little bit and finish curing, and you're good to go. Now, even if you don't have a dog or need a food and water dish stand, a project like this is the basis of so many other projects that you can build. For instance, if you don't cut the holes in the top, you have a nice step stool. Make this a bit longer and you have a bench. Make it wider from there and you have a coffee table. Make the legs longer so that it's taller and you have a dining table. If you can follow along and build this project, you can build any of those projects with the exact same design, just tweaking a couple of measurements. And speaking of dogs, a few weeks ago I told you how our dog Gene wasn't doing so well. He had stopped eating so much of his dry kibble and was losing weight and his energy. Well, I'm happy to say that after switching Gene over to a fresh, healthy food by the farmer's dog, things have completely turned around. Farmer's Dog makes freshly prepared, human-grade dog food. It's cooked with the same safety standards as our own food, and their recipes are created by board-certified veterinary nutritionalists. Food arrives pre-portioned just for him, which makes it easy to help maintain a healthy weight. Gene is actually loving his food now, and he's actually excited for mealtime. I've also noticed that he's got a lot more energy. We've been enjoying our long walks, and honestly, that's been good for the both of us. So if you're ready to start feeding your dog freshly made, healthy food, be sure to check out The Farmer's Dog. And you can get 50% off of your first order by clicking the link down in the description or scanning the QR code on screen. And a big thanks to The Farmer's Dog for sponsoring today's video. All right, so this next project is really simple, but it's one of my favorite projects to build. And that's because something so simple can have a really big impact, especially if you're someone like me that likes to have a few plants around the house. So I'm going to show you how to build a couple of really neat plant stands. And this takes very little material. In fact, this is all we need for one of our stands. Now, the dimensions of your stand are going to depend on the size of the plant that you're building it for. So I have a smaller and a larger plant here. For the smaller ones, I do recommend a slightly taller stand to make them a little bit more elevated. And for the bigger plants, something a little bit shorter to the ground and a little squatter, I think works out just fine for these. So we're going to start with the larger plant stand. I'll show you how to build that. And it'll be the same thing for the smaller one. You just change the dimensions, make the legs a little bit longer to give it a little more height. So the first thing we need to do is rip down our board into 4.5-inch wide strips to give us our legs. Now we need a few dimensions off of our pot for our stand to fit properly. And this could get complicated and use lots of geometry, but we're going to avoid all of that. And I'm going to show you some really simple techniques and tricks to do this. So the first thing we need to know is how far up the side of our pot is our stand going to go. Now, I like it more than halfway, but not all the way to the top. So right around 2/3 of the way, I think is pretty good. And on this pot, that's about 6 inches. So we note that down. Next, you can see that this pot has a bit of an angle where it's coming out. Again, you can get into some complicated geometry to figure out exactly what that angle is, but we don't care. We just need to know what to set our measurements at the table saw to make the cut. So we're going to take our bevel gauge and we're just going to set it to that angle. So exactly how many degrees is this angle? Well, I don't know and I don't really care. Uh, all we need to know again is to figure out where to set our measurements. So I'm going to take this angle and I'm going to mark it on a piece of paper using the bottom of my bevel gauge as a reference against the bottom of the page. And then I'm going to take my square, reference it off the bottom of the page as well, right next to that angle, and I'm going to mark a line 6 inches up. Now I just got to measure the distance between the end of those two lines to see how I need to set the table saw. And on this, it's 1/2 inch. So nice and easy. So now I just need to make a mark 1/2 inch in on the top of my leg piece. Okay, our sides are going to be 6 inches tall, so I need to mark it 6 inches. And then in the middle, we're going to have a cross piece that's 1.5 inches wide, so I'll make a mark 1.5 inches down from there. Now at the table saw, I set up my tapering jig by lining up the two marks, the one at the end of the board and the one that's 6 inches up with the edge of the tapering jig. Now you can cut the angles on all 4 of our legs. Just be careful not to change the setting on the fence for your tapering jig. So now that we've got our taper cut on one side of all of our legs, we need to cut the other side. The same process as we did before, so just line up the second mark with the edge of our tapering jig and 1/2 inch from the end. When you're done, you should have a flat spot of about 1.5 inches wide in the middle of our leg. Now that we've got our legs cut out and the tapers on them, we need a couple of cross pieces to hold these together. And I know the bottom of my potted plant is 7.5 inches. I'm going to add maybe an extra 1/8 of an inch on that just to give me a little bit of wiggle room. And these will be 1.5 inches wide as well. Okay, we need to make kind of a half flap so these two pieces can interlock so that our legs will fit together for our stand. First thing I did was mark where the waist is so I know what material to remove. Then I put in a flat tooth table saw blade into the table saw, and I'm going to set the blade height to half the width of my block. And once you've got it set up, just start nibbling away at the waist until the two blocks fit together. All right, now for the joinery for the final assembly of our plant stand, you have multiple options and any of them will work just fine. You could go back with pocket holes, or you could use dowels or biscuits, or do hand cut mortise and tenon if that's what you like. For me, I'm actually going to use the domino. Now I know a lot of people get really irate in YouTube comments whenever they see a domino, but it's just another tool that may or may not be in your arsenal. Use whatever you have available or whatever you enjoy using in the shop. Now when you glue this up, make sure you don't glue the two halves together. We want to be able to take this apart and break it down. If you sell these, this is great because it flat packs really easy. So make sure you don't glue that together when you do your glue up. Okay, so now that the glue has dried, we're going to take this apart and we need to sand everything down, round over the corners, and get it ready for finish. Now with this design, it is so easy to customize the stand to fit whatever size plant that you're using. And because these stands break down flat so easily, it makes them ideal for shipping out as gifts or part of an online store. And remember, if you'd like to build any of these projects I showed you today, I've got full detailed plans over at biscuittreewoodworks.com for all of these projects and a whole lot more. And if you'd like to see more build projects, I have a couple of videos right over here that I know you're going to enjoy.